This is really cool. I have never had a bar as a backdrop before when I gave a presentation, so there's no telling where this one's going to go. I want to thank GreenSign for sponsoring this event. It is truly an honor to have an opportunity to talk to the Charlotte chapter of the IIA. And I want to start out, I want to get to know the audience a little bit. We'll start out with a little survey. How many of you feel that fraud is rather pervasive in society today? Show of hands. How many think it's out there all over the place? Okay. How many of you have personally experienced, in the course of your professional life, have personally experienced fraud? Or what you perceive to be fraud? I'm not saying somebody went to jail. I'm not saying somebody lost their job. Okay. How many of you have actually committed fraud? Come on, y'all, we're among friends here. We can be honest with each other, can't we? Okay, well, maybe this would be a good place to start then. When I was in public accounting, our meal reimbursement came on a per diem basis. We got reimbursed the same amount no matter how much we spent. When I went to work for a Fortune 500 company, their policy was actual. And for anything under $25, we did not have to submit a receipt. My first week out on the road, I just craved McDonald's one night. That's what I wanted. $5.26. An anal accountant that I am, I attached a receipt to my expense report. Now, there's two things you got to know to really appreciate this story. Back in those days, $25 would be the equivalent of about $75 or $80 today. And number two, it was difficult for one person to spend $5.26 in one sitting at McDonald's, but I was up to the challenge. Got a call from my boss. He said, "Don't ever do that again. Executives with this company do not spend $5.26 for dinner. Furthermore, I don't want to see your expense report cluttered up with receipts for anything under $25. So, from then on, my dinners cost between $23 and $24.99, unless, of course, I spent over $25 and I attached a receipt. Now, is this fraud? Or is this one of those generally accepted things that's covered under GAAP? Now, a few years later, I'm working for another company. They have a great travel policy. We can come home every weekend. And if we're going to be in the air more than 3 hours, we get to fly first class. Furthermore, the policy was written that if you're going to be out of town for more than 2 weeks, you can do a whole lot of stuff as long as the stuff doesn't cost more than the plane ticket. Now, most of the people were married. They always went home on the weekends. I was single. Now, what can a North Carolina boy do on a weekend if he's out on the West Coast and he's got the price of a first-class plane ticket in his hip pocket? Oh, shoot, I don't know. How about Friday afternoon, fly from LA to Salt Lake City, rent a car, check into the best hotel in town, eat at some really, really great restaurants, ski Alta on Saturday, snowbird on Sunday, fly back to LA Monday morning, and still have a couple $100 left over. Anal accountant that I am, I attached a cost justification worksheet to my expense report showing how much money my ski weekend had saved the company. I got a call from my boss. He said, as far as I'm concerned, what you did not violate corporate policy. Furthermore, you told me what you were going to do before you did it. and I approved it. But now that I see it in writing, can you make it look different? I said, hey, I got a good friend that's a travel agent. She can give me receipts to make it look like anything you want. He said, great. From now on, just put down the plane ticket and don't tell me what you do. Now, is this fraud? Or is this one of these politically correct things? My boss thought that senior management time would be better spent focused on the business than focused on my social life. And then I was down in San Antonio doing an audit. I was virtually certain that 3 guys had conspired to embezzle $1 million. If I had to follow proper procedure to get the evidence that I needed, it was going to take a long time. Furthermore, I had to talk to clients. So these guys were actually in the position to stonewall me, to keep me from getting the information that I needed. So I grabbed a bunch of client files, I went back to my hotel, and I started making phone calls. I told them that I worked for a market research firm that had been hired by the company to do a survey on the sales practices, and would they mind answering a few questions. They didn't, and within 35 minutes, I had all the proof that I needed that, in fact, they had embezzled $1 million. I confronted one of the guys the next morning, and at first he denied everything. And then I told him what I knew, and I told him how I found it. The guy went berserk. He was bouncing off the ceiling, he was yelling and screaming at me, and he told me that my audit tactics were probably the most unethical thing that he had ever encountered in business. I said, sir, coming from you, I consider that a compliment of the highest order. So I got to thinking about that. You know, did I commit fraud to catch a thief? Or is this one of those vigilante justice things that, you know, we're okay with? Any 24 fans in here? Anybody remember the show 24? Did we care what Jack Bauer did to the bad guys? You know, as long as he saved the world, we didn't care. So anyways, right away, we have a problem out of the chute here. What exactly is fraud? What are we going to call fraud? Well, fortunately, our system has developed a venue of ultimate arbitration where we can go with those difficult questions. It's called the Supreme Court. Back in 1964, the Supreme Court was hearing arguments on pornography. And Justice Potter Stewart uttered this famous phrase, "I shall not today attempt further to define the kinds of material I understand to be pornographic, but I know it when I see it." That's how I feel about fraud. I know it when I see it. It depends on the person, the place, the circumstances, but I know it when I see it. I call it the personal doctrine of fairness. Now, we all would like our fraud to be black and white, but just like life, fraud is not black and white, it's many shades of gray. I was working on a job several years ago for a large company, and the guy I was working with said, "Why don't you join this industry association?" I said, "It costs $200 and I don't see any value in it." He said, "Well, I think it would look good for you to belong to this industry association, so go ahead and join and I'll pay for it." About 3 months later, the guy called and he said, corporate was doing an audit of my department, and they didn't think it was right that we should pay association dues for a consultant. So I want you to deduct $200 from your next expense submission. I said, but he said, listen. He said, this is not a battle that I'm willing to fight right now. Furthermore, if there's anybody that knows how to get that $200 back, it's you. Okay, so how big is fraud? Well, somebody decided that they could identify what fraud is, and they decided that they could measure it. And it is the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and in their 2014 global report, they estimate that fraud is a $3.7 trillion worldwide issue every year, over $1 trillion in the United States alone. Now, the last time I checked, I think Walmart's sales back in 2013 was about $500 million. Now, for you statisticians in the group, does this mean that we are twice as likely to encounter fraud as we are to encounter Walmart? A study by KMG says that fraud hits 75% of all businesses, and the North Carolina Department of Insurance estimates that 10 cents of every premium dollar goes to pay a fraudulent claim. So, how much does your auto insurance cost a year? $1,000, $2,000? More if, heaven forbid, you have teenage drivers in the house? How much does your homeowner's insurance cost a year? $1,000, $2,000? Means that $400 a year is coming out of your pocket to pay fraudulent insurance claims. So much for what they call a victimless crime. Well, why isn't fraud prosecuted? We see fraud in the news a lot, but quite frankly, not $1 trillion worth. Well, from a business perspective or circumstances, fraud might be tolerated. Now, whether you realize it or not, I'm thinking that every business decision that you make includes a cost justification analysis. Generally speaking, we will not spend $10,000 to protect a $100 asset. Now, we will spend $10,000 to protect 1,000 $100 assets, but it's just not cost efficient. Retail stores tolerate a little bit of shoplifting because it would probably be bad for business to strip search everybody before they left the store. I run into this a lot in the insurance industry. Insurance claims seem to be like the lottery. Okay, everybody that has a claim expects to be paid something, and the insurance company wants to pay something just to make it go away. Now, I understand the cost of lawsuits and why they want to be avoided, but that's not to say that it still doesn't drive me crazy. I worked on a case not long ago as a $500,000 business interruption claim. It took me one day to come up with the evidence that the claim was worth $0. I thought the insurance company would be thrilled. I was sitting in a lawyer's office here in Charlotte. We were on a conference call with 3 executives from this insurance company. They were all guys, I'm sorry, ladies. I said, gentlemen, I got good news and I got bad news. I said, the bad news is I'm paid by the hour. So I'm not going to make much on this case because I'm done. The good news is the claim is worth $0. Much to my surprise, we started to get pushback. These guys started to argue with me. They said, well, did you think about this? I said, yeah, I thought about that. The claim is worth $0. Well, did you look at this? Yes, I looked at that. The claim is worth $0. Well, how about this? Did you consider that? I said, there's no reason to consider that. The claim is worth $0, full stop. And they continued to argue. Finally, after about 20 minutes, I got frustrated and I said, listen, guys, only an idiot would offer this guy a dime to settle this claim. And the call ended shortly thereafter. I turned and looked at the lawyer. I said, what just happened? He said, I don't know. I'll find out. The lawyer called me back 2 days later. He said, I found out what the problem was. The idiot was on the phone call. Yeah. That senior vice president of claims had already offered the insured $100,000 to settle the claim. Surprisingly, I don't get any more business from that insurance company. Okay, sometimes fraud is condoned. Everybody else is doing it. We have to do it just to be competitive. And sometimes fraud is required. I had a good buddy working for a large accounting firm that had a subsidiary down in Brazil. He had to go down and audit the subsidiary. This guy did not speak Portuguese, so he had an interpreter with him, and as they were going down the income statement line by line, they came to one line that translated as bribes and payoffs. He said, bribes and payoffs? Well, they produced a sheet that listed at the local port who you had to pay and how much you had to pay them to ensure that your goods were unloaded. I had another friend that was controller of a large construction company. They were doing a big project up in Chicago, putting up a couple $100 million building right on the loop there. And the day they mobilized, within the first hour, they had received 12 citations. Nobody knew what was going on. And then that afternoon, one of the people from the construction company went to visit the local alderman. And after he had made a $10,000 donation to the alderman's favorite charity, which I think was Save the Whales in Lake Michigan or something like that, the project went off without a hitch. So this kind of begs the question, you know, when is it fraud and when is it a tax? I don't know. You all can think about that one. From a personal or moral perspective, sympathy. It's hard to imagine that we would have sympathy for somebody that just stole a lot of money from us, but I got a good buddy that's a lawyer in the western part of the state. I called him not too long ago. I said, how's it going? He said, I'm just swamped. He said, I had to let my secretary go and I haven't been able to replace her. I said, you let her go? What do you mean? I said, she'd been with you for 25 years. He said, yeah. He said, I know that she and her husband were having financial problems, but I didn't realize how bad it was until we found she'd embezzled $10,000 from the firm. Okay. He had worked with this lady for 25 years. He was godfather to one of her children. Is he going to have her arrested and thrown in jail? I don't think so. Adverse publicity. The company just can't afford to be on the front page. They can't afford to let the public know that they have been hoodwinked. I was at a conference a while back in a city which I shall not name, and after the first day's session, I looked up an old buddy of mine and we went out to a local pub for beer. And I told him some of the things I was involved in. I said, I've been doing some fraud investigation lately. He says, oh, I got somebody you got to meet. Over in the corner, there was a guy sitting by himself who looked like he had been in the pub a lot longer than we had. We went over. My buddy introduced me to him. He was medical director of a large teaching hospital affiliated with a very prestigious university. He had just uncovered $100 million Medicare fraud. Now, over and above the fact that this fraud included some of the top heart docs, some of the top brain docs, some of the top cancer docs in the world, this particular university had had a bad run of publicity, and they just couldn't afford to be back on the front page. So this is a $100 million fraud that you never heard about that was quietly handled. Finally, restitution. The fraudster is caught. You got me. I'll give the money back. Everybody's happy. I got a call from a buddy of mine a couple years ago up in Philadelphia. He said a client of his suspected that their CFO had embezzled a substantial amount of money and they would need some forensic work done, and was I available? I said, sure, I can do that. Well, I didn't hear anything for 3 weeks, and I called my buddy back. He says, all been taken care of. They confronted the CFO. He admitted that over a period of 10 years, he had embezzled $3 million. He invested it wisely, and that nest egg was now $5 million. He would write them a check for $5 million if they would agree not to prosecute him. Does anybody believe that he only stole $3 million? Does anybody believe that his nest egg was only $5 million? Okay, how is fraud found? Again, I'm going to go back to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners in their 2014 report. They said that 52% of fraud is found by accident. Now, I include whistleblowers in here, and basically I include anything where the evidence of fraud came from the outside. Now, this kind of surprised me a little bit because this is a biennial report, and in all the other reports, this number was up like in the 70s, 70-some%. So I looked a little closer at the 2014 report, and I saw that they added another category. It was called found by management. So I can only conclude that, you know, in prior years, they figured that anything that management found must have been an accident. 3% of fraud is found by external audit. 81% of the companies surveyed list external audit as their #1 anti-fraud measure. Now, does anybody else see a disconnect here? So why don't external audits find fraud? Now, how many people here serve time in public accounting? I have only the utmost respect for the profession, and I think a certified audit and a test audit is about one of the hardest things to do in business. And that's probably why the insurance premiums are so high. But there are reasons why external audits don't find fraud. Now here's where I have to give you a little disclaimer. What you're about to hear is Gary German. This is not condoned by the AICPA, the North Carolina Association, or any other accounting association. This is me. There are 3 things I have found over the years that are usually required to find fraud. Number 1, there has to be fraud. Number 2, you have to look for it. And number 3, you have to stay until you find it. Now, I know what y'all are thinking. They didn't check this guy out, did they? I mean, it is mid-December. I need these 2 hours of CPE, and this isn't going to count. Well, just hang with me for a minute, and let me explain. There has to be fraud. Okay, in spite of everything else that we've said here, the overwhelming number of transactions that you review are legitimate. Okay, most all the transactions that you review are legitimate. The fraudulent ones are designed to be hidden. And the fraudsters are pretty darn good at hiding it. And finally, it's not always material. I was with Price Waterhouse. We're doing the audit of a small bank in North Carolina. And has anybody ever done an audit of a bank? Okay, especially a small bank. You know, a bank is one of the few businesses around that close their books every single solitary day. So that is one of the few businesses around that we could jump in on January 1 and start auditing. And we had a very tight window in which to audit these banks. So one of my assignments was the interoffice account. And it was $10,000 out. And I couldn't figure it out. It drove me crazy. I think I had probably 2 hours to audit in the budget. I had 2 hours in the budget to audit this, and after I got up around 6 or 7, the senior came to me and he said, "It's immaterial, we can't spend any more time on it, move on." Well, the president of this particular bank was a third-generation banker, and he treated every dime in that bank like it was his own. Pretty much like the big Charlotte banks today, don't you think?
Yeah.
So come hell or high water, he's going to find that $10,000, and he assigned a senior vice president to find this $10,000. About 6 months later, the lady that had embezzled the $10,000 had to take vacation. She had to let somebody else